"That's the sloppiest salute I've ever seen." Drill Sergeant Thompson barked at the elderly man who'd approached the Army recruiting station. The old visitor had rendered what appeared to be a half-hearted, trembling salute that violated every military protocol Thompson had spent 15 years perfecting. The old man simply nodded, showing no anger or protest at the public humiliation. Instead, he quietly reached into his wallet and handed over his military ID for the background check he'd requested. Thompson glanced at the ID card and felt his blood turn to ice. The name read Carlos Mendez, USMC Sniper Hall of Fame. And suddenly, the drill sergeant realized he'd just insulted a legend whose trembling hands had once been the steadiest in the Marine Corps. The room fell silent. Recruits who had been snickering now stood straighter. Thompson slowly removed his hat, heart pounding with shame and awe. Because those trembling hands? They had once held a rifle so steady, enemies never saw their final breath. The man he'd humiliated wasn't weak. He was worn by time, not failure. And now, the sergeant stood face to face with a legend he'd just mistaken for a joke. Welcome to Silent Salute, where we discover that sometimes the steadiest hands shake not from weakness, but from the weight of what they've carried. Before we continue this powerful story, tell us in the comments from which city in the world are you watching this video today. And if you believe that true warriors never stop being warriors, hit that subscribe button to support our channel. We're honored to share these remarkable stories with you. The Army recruiting station in downtown Phoenix operated with the kind of military efficiency that was designed to impress potential recruits and their families. The facility served as both an information center for people considering military service and a processing location for those ready to begin their journey from civilian to soldier. Staff Sergeant Thompson had been stationed at the Phoenix recruiting office for 18 months, part of a 3-year assignment that took him away from combat operations to focus on finding and developing the next generation of Army personnel. His 15-year career had included multiple deployments to Iraq and Afghanistan, where he'd served as an infantry squad leader and earned recognition for his leadership under combat conditions. Thompson took pride in maintaining military standards in all aspects of the recruiting station's operations. The facility was spotless, uniforms were immaculate, and every interaction with potential recruits was conducted with the kind of military bearing that demonstrated what professional soldiers looked like. The recruiting station served a diverse population that included high school students considering military service, parents seeking information about their children's military options, and veterans exploring opportunities for continued service or career transition assistance. Among the visitors that Tuesday morning was an elderly Hispanic man who appeared to be in his 70s, walking slowly with obvious difficulty and showing the kind of physical fragility that suggested serious health problems. He moved carefully, as if managing chronic pain, and his hands showed a slight tremor that was visible when he reached for door handles or paperwork. Carlos Mendez had come to the recruiting station not to seek military service for himself, but to inquire about programs that might be available for his grandson, who was considering Army enlistment after graduating from high school. Carlos wanted to understand the training his grandson would receive and the opportunities that military service might provide for a young man from a working-class family. What the recruiting station staff didn't know was that Carlos' interest in military service came from personal experience that few people would ever match. Before his medical retirement in 1985, Gunnery Sergeant Carlos Mendez had been one of the most decorated snipers in Marine Corps history, with a service record that included 156 confirmed kills across 4 combat deployments and innovations in precision marksmanship that had influenced military training for decades. Carlos had been inducted into the Marine Corps Sniper Hall of Fame in 1990, recognition reserved for fewer than 50 Marines whose marksmanship achievements and tactical innovations had shaped the development of precision shooting capabilities throughout the military. But Parkinson's disease, diagnosed 15 years earlier, had gradually eroded the physical capabilities that had once made Carlos one of the most lethal precision shooters in the world. The tremor that now affected his hands was a cruel irony for someone whose legendary status had been built on superhuman steadiness and control. Carlos had chosen to visit the Army recruiting station rather than a Marine Corps facility because he wanted to avoid the recognition that might come with being identified as a former Marine. His grandson was interested in Army service, and Carlos preferred to gather information anonymously rather than deal with the attention that his military background might generate. As Carlos entered the recruiting station, his movement and bearing immediately caught Thompson's attention. The elderly man's obvious physical difficulties and civilian clothes suggested someone who might be seeking information rather than military service, but his automatic assessment of the facility and respectful behavior indicated possible military background. Thompson approached Carlos with the professional courtesy that characterized his interactions with all visitors, regardless of their apparent military experience or potential for enlistment. "Good morning, sir. I'm Staff Sergeant Thompson. How can I help you today?" Carlos explained his interest in learning about Army training and opportunities for his grandson, emphasizing that he wanted to understand what military service would involve so he could provide appropriate guidance to a young man making important life decisions. Thompson was impressed by Carlos' thoughtful approach to military service planning and his obvious concern for ensuring that his grandson made informed decisions about his future. "Sir, I'd be happy to provide information about Army training and career opportunities. Would you like to sit down while we discuss your grandson's interests and qualifications?" As they talked, Thompson noted Carlos' intelligent questions about military training and his understanding of military structure that suggested either extensive research or personal military experience. But Thompson's assessment of Carlos changed dramatically when the elderly man attempted to render a military salute as Thompson prepared to show him training materials. The salute was clearly intended as a gesture of respect, but Carlos' trembling hands and limited mobility made the movement appear awkward and imprecise by military standards. Thompson's reaction was immediate and harsh, reflecting his commitment to military protocol and his assumption that Carlos was a civilian who didn't understand proper military courtesy. "Sir, that's the sloppiest salute I've ever seen," Thompson said with the kind of authoritative tone he used when correcting military bearing violations. "Civilians don't need to salute, and if you're going to attempt military courtesy, you should do it properly." Carlos' response was quiet and dignified, showing no anger or resentment at Thompson's public criticism of his physical limitations. "You're absolutely right, Sergeant. I apologize for the poor execution." Thompson was satisfied that he'd maintained military standards while educating a civilian about appropriate protocol, but he noticed that Carlos' reaction seemed unusually accepting for someone who'd just been publicly corrected. Most civilians who were embarrassed by military protocol mistakes became defensive or made excuses for their errors. Carlos had simply acknowledged the criticism and moved on, suggesting either exceptional maturity or familiarity with military correction procedures. As Thompson continued providing information about Army programs, he found himself increasingly curious about Carlos' background and his obvious knowledge of military service and training requirements. "Sir, if you don't mind me asking, do you have military experience? Your questions suggest familiarity with military operations that goes beyond casual interest." Carlos was reluctant to discuss his military background, preferring to keep the conversation focused on his grandson's potential Army service rather than his own history. "I served briefly many years ago, but that's not relevant to my grandson's situation." Thompson accepted Carlos' vague answer but continued to notice details that suggested more extensive military experience than brief service would typically provide. When Carlos asked about sniper training and special operations opportunities, his questions were specific and technically sophisticated, indicating knowledge that seemed inconsistent with limited military experience. But the revelation of Carlos' true background would come when Thompson requested identification for a background information packet that Carlos had requested to share with his grandson. "Sir, if you'd like me to prepare informational materials for your grandson, I'll need some basic information for our files. Could I see some form of identification?" Carlos reached for his wallet with hands that trembled visibly, a movement that reinforced Thompson's assumption that the elderly man was simply a concerned grandfather with limited military knowledge. But when Carlos handed over his military identification card, Thompson's entire understanding of the situation was shattered by what he read. Thompson glanced at the identification card expecting to see standard veteran information that would confirm Carlos' brief service and allow him to complete the paperwork for the requested information packet. Instead, he found himself staring at credentials that made his hands shake almost as much as Carlos did. Carlos Mendez, Gunnery Sergeant, United States Marine Corps, retired. Marine Corps Sniper Hall of Fame. Presidential Unit Citation. Navy Cross. Silver Star with Oak Leaf Cluster. Thompson read the credentials twice, unable to believe that he'd just publicly criticized the military bearing of someone whose decorations and achievements exceeded anything he'd encountered in his 15-year Army career. The Marine Corps Sniper Hall of Fame was reserved for fewer than 50 Marines whose marksmanship achievements had shaped military history. Thompson knew enough about military decorations to understand that the Navy Cross was second only to the Medal of Honor, and that multiple silver stars indicated repeated acts of extraordinary heroism under combat conditions. Thompson looked up from the identification card to see Carlos watching him with patient understanding, clearly aware of the shock that his credentials would create, but showing no satisfaction or superiority about Thompson's obvious discomfort. "Sir," Thompson said. His voice completely changed from the authoritative tone he'd used when criticizing Carlos' salute. "I need to apologize. I had no idea about your background." Carlos' response reflected the dignity and grace that had characterized his entire interaction with Thompson. "Sergeant Thompson, you were enforcing military standards based on what you observed. There's no need for apologies." But Thompson understood that his criticism of Carlos' physical limitations represented more than just a misunderstanding about civilian protocol. He'd publicly mocked the physical difficulties of someone whose legendary status should have commanded absolute respect. "Sir, when I criticized your salute, I didn't understand that you were dealing with physical challenges. That was completely inappropriate." Carlos' explanation of his situation would provide Thompson with education about the long-term physical costs of military service that weren't always visible or understood by younger military personnel. "Sergeant, I have Parkinson's disease, which affects motor control and causes the tremors you observed. The condition has progressed to the point where I can no longer perform many physical tasks that I once took for granted." Thompson was beginning to understand that Carlos' sloppy salute wasn't the result of civilian ignorance or disrespect, but the physical limitation of someone whose body had been affected by degenerative disease. "The irony," Carlos continued with gentle humor, "is that the hands that shake now were once steady enough to make precision shots that saved Marine lives in combat situations. Physical capabilities change, but the respect and dedication that motivated military service remain constant." Thompson was processing the profound lesson about assumptions, respect, and the invisible challenges that veterans might face long after their military service ended. "Sir, your service record indicates achievements that exceed anything I've encountered in my career. Would you be willing to share some of your experience with me?" Carlos was hesitant to discuss his military service in detail, but Thompson's genuine interest and obvious respect convinced him that sharing some of his background might provide educational value. "Sergeant Thompson, my service included 4 combat deployments where precision marksmanship was essential for mission success and Marine safety. The techniques I developed were later incorporated into military training programs that enhanced capabilities for subsequent generations of Marines and soldiers." Thompson was taking mental notes, understanding that he was receiving instruction from someone whose expertise had influenced military training throughout the armed forces. "Sir, the Marine Corps Sniper Hall of Fame represents the highest level of recognition for precision marksmanship achievement. What did it take to earn that distinction?" Carlos' answer provided insight into the level of dedication and sacrifice required for elite military performance. The Hall of Fame recognition came from developing techniques that enhanced sniper effectiveness while reducing risks to Marine units. It wasn't about individual achievement, but about finding ways to complete missions more safely and efficiently. Carlos continued explaining his military service with emphasis on collective benefit rather than personal recognition. "Every technique I developed was refined through input from other Marines who faced similar challenges. The innovations that led to Hall of Fame recognition were team efforts that improved capabilities for entire units." Thompson was gaining appreciation for the collaborative nature of military innovation and the way individual expertise could enhance institutional capabilities. "Sir, how did your techniques influence current military training?" Carlos' response demonstrated the continuing relevance of his military service to contemporary operations. "The camouflage methods, target acquisition techniques, and precision shooting principles I developed in Vietnam have been adapted for urban combat environments in Iraq and Afghanistan. Modern snipers use evolved versions of tactics that were originally developed to meet the specific challenges we faced decades ago. Thompson realized that his own combat experience had been enhanced by techniques developed by Carlos and other Marines whose innovations had become standard military doctrine. Sir, that means your service has continued protecting soldiers and Marines long after your active duty ended. Carlos nodded agreement. Military service doesn't end with retirement. The knowledge and experience gained during active duty continue contributing to military effectiveness when they're properly preserved and shared. Thompson was beginning to understand that his encounter with Carlos represented an opportunity to learn from someone whose expertise could enhance his own military effectiveness and his ability to train future soldiers. Sir, would you be willing to share your insights with soldiers who could benefit from your experience? Carlos' answer reflected his ongoing commitment to military service despite his physical limitations. Sergeant Thompson, if my experience can help current military personnel be more effective and safer in their operations, I'm always willing to share what I've learned. Thompson realized that Carlos' visit to the recruiting station had created an unexpected opportunity for professional development and education that went far beyond the original purpose of gathering information for his grandson. Sir, would you consider speaking with some of our soldiers about precision marksmanship and the mental aspects of military service? Your perspective would be invaluable for personnel preparing for deployment. Carlos agreed to Thompson's request, understanding that sharing his expertise could serve military personnel who might face challenges similar to those he'd encountered during his own service. But Carlos had more to reveal about his current situation that would further change Thompson's understanding of the ongoing challenges faced by military veterans. Carlos' willingness to share his expertise led to a conversation that revealed the complexity of his post-service life and the challenges he faced in maintaining his identity as a Marine while managing the progressive effects of Parkinson's disease. Sergeant Thompson, there's something you should understand about why I was hesitant to discuss my military background when I first arrived here today. Thompson was curious about additional factors that might have influenced Carlos' preference for anonymity during his visit. Sir, what made you reluctant to identify yourself as a Marine? Carlos' answer provided insight into the psychological challenges that some veterans faced when their physical capabilities were diminished by age or illness. For 30 years after my retirement, I've been struggling with the fact that the physical abilities that define my military identity have been gradually taken away by disease. Carlos continued explaining his complex relationship with his military service and its recognition. Being inducted into the Marine Corps Sniper Hall of Fame was the highest honor of my military career, but it also created expectations about my capabilities that I can no longer meet. Thompson was beginning to understand that Carlos' physical limitations created internal conflict about his military identity and his worthiness of continued recognition for past achievements. The tremor that affects my hands now makes it impossible for me to demonstrate the shooting skills that earn my reputation. Sometimes I feel like I'm dishonoring my Marine Corps legacy by allowing people to see what I've become. Carlos' honest discussion of his insecurities provided Thompson with insight into the emotional challenges that many veterans faced when confronting the physical realities of aging or illness. Sir, your current physical condition doesn't diminish your past achievements or their continuing value to military training and capabilities. Thompson's reassurance was genuine, but Carlos had more to explain about the complexity of maintaining military identity when physical capabilities no longer matched historical achievements. Sergeant, when I attempted that salute earlier, I knew it would be imperfect because of my motor control problems. But rendering military courtesy is still important to me as a way of maintaining connection to my Marine identity. Carlos' explanation of his motivation for attempting the salute, despite knowing it would be physically imperfect, provided Thompson with new understanding of the dignity and courage required to maintain military bearing when facing physical challenges. Your criticism of my salute was actually helpful because it reminded me that military standards remain important even when individual capabilities change. Thompson was amazed by Carlos' ability to find positive meaning in what had been an embarrassing and inappropriate interaction. Sir, I should have recognized that you were dealing with physical challenges rather than assuming you were simply unfamiliar with military protocol. Carlos' response demonstrated the grace and understanding that characterized his approach to difficult situations. Sergeant Thompson, you couldn't have known about my medical condition without additional information. Your reaction was based on maintaining military standards, which is appropriate and necessary. But Carlos had more to share about his current situation that would reveal the ongoing ways he contributed to military communities despite his physical limitations. The reason I'm interested in my grandson's potential Army service isn't just family concern. I've been working with veteran organizations to support military families and help young people understand what military service involves. Thompson was impressed by Carlos' continuing service to military communities despite his personal challenges. What kind of work do you do with veteran organizations? Carlos' answer revealed the scope of his post-retirement contributions to military and veteran support. I speak with high school students about military service, help families understand what their loved ones experience during training and deployment, and work with veteran support programs that assist Marines dealing with medical challenges similar to my own. Thompson realized that Carlos' visit to the recruiting station was part of ongoing efforts to support military service and veteran communities rather than just personal information gathering. Sir, your work with young people considering military service probably influences their decision-making and preparation in ways that enhance their likelihood of success. Carlos agreed. Understanding what military service really involves helps young people make informed decisions and prepare appropriately for the challenges they'll face. Thompson was beginning to understand that Carlos' expertise and experience could benefit the recruiting station's mission of finding and developing qualified military personnel. Sir, would you be interested in working with our recruiting station to help potential soldiers understand what military service involves? Carlos' response reflected his commitment to supporting military service while maintaining appropriate boundaries around his personal limitations. Sergeant Thompson, I'd be honored to contribute to your recruiting efforts. My experience might help young people understand both the opportunities and challenges that come with military service. Thompson realized that his initial criticism of Carlos had led to discovering a resource that could significantly enhance the recruiting station's educational and support capabilities. Sir, your perspective as someone who achieved the highest levels of military recognition could provide inspiration and guidance for recruits throughout their military careers. But Carlos wanted to ensure that Thompson understood the limitations and boundaries that would need to be established for any formal collaboration. Sergeant, if I work with your recruiting station, it would need to be in a capacity that focuses on mentoring and education rather than physical demonstrations or activities that require capabilities I no longer possess. Thompson assured Carlos that his contribution would be valued for his knowledge and experience rather than physical capabilities. Sir, your expertise in military service, leadership, and the long-term implications of military careers would be invaluable for recruitment and retention programs. Carlos agreed to explore opportunities for collaboration, understanding that his experience could serve military communities in ways that honored his Marine Corps legacy while working within his current physical limitations. Thompson realized that his encounter with Carlos had transformed from an embarrassing mistake into an opportunity for professional development and enhanced recruiting capabilities that could benefit both current military personnel and potential recruits. The elderly man with trembling hands whom Thompson had criticized for his imperfect salute had proved to be one of the most valuable resources the recruiting station could access for supporting military service and veteran communities. Carlos' collaboration with the Army recruiting station became one of their most successful outreach programs, providing potential recruits with realistic understanding of military service from someone whose experience spanned the highest levels of military achievement and the long-term challenges of veteran life. His presentations to high school students considering military service were notably effective because he could address both the opportunities for achievement and recognition that military service provided and the physical and psychological challenges that veterans might face throughout their lives. Thompson's initial mistake in criticizing Carlos' salute became a learning experience that enhanced his understanding of veteran issues and the importance of treating all military personnel with respect regardless of their current physical capabilities. The recruiting station developed new protocols for recognizing and honoring veteran visitors, ensuring that staff understood how to respectfully interact with former military personnel whose service might not be immediately apparent. Carlos' story became part of military sensitivity training that educated current personnel about the long-term effects of military service and the importance of maintaining respect and support for veterans throughout their entire lives. His work with the recruiting station expanded to include support for military families dealing with medical challenges, providing guidance based on his personal experience managing the transition from elite military capability to civilian life with chronic illness. Thompson's professional development was significantly enhanced by his relationship with Carlos, gaining perspectives on military service and veteran support that influenced his approach to recruiting and soldier development throughout his career. The recruiting station's success rates improved measurably after Carlos began participating in their educational programs, as potential recruits gained better understanding of military service and were better prepared for the challenges they would face. Carlos' presence at recruiting events provided inspiration for veterans considering continued military service and demonstrated that military identity and contribution could continue despite physical limitations or medical challenges. His collaboration with Army personnel helped bridge gaps between different military services, demonstrating that expertise and dedication transcended branch affiliations and could benefit all military communities. The educational materials that Carlos helped develop became models for recruiting stations throughout the region, providing resources that enhanced understanding of military service for both potential recruits and their families. Thompson's recognition of Carlos' value led to his selection for advanced training in veteran affairs and military family support, enhancing his capabilities for serving military communities throughout his career. Carlos' participation in recruiting activities provided him with renewed purpose and connection to military communities, helping him maintain his Marine identity despite the physical changes that Parkinson's disease had brought to his life. The relationship between Carlos and Thompson evolved from an embarrassing first encounter to a collaborative partnership that enhanced military recruiting and veteran support throughout their community. Carlos' story became part of military education about the importance of recognizing and honoring service regardless of how it was presented, and the value of utilizing veteran expertise for current military operations and training. His example influenced military policies about veteran recognition and support, leading to enhanced programs for identifying and honoring former military personnel whose contributions might not be immediately apparent. The trembling hands that Thompson had mocked for their imperfect salute became symbols of the physical cost of military service and the importance of treating all veterans with dignity and respect regardless of their current capabilities. Carlos' legacy extended beyond his combat achievements to include his contributions to military recruiting, family support, and veteran services that enhanced military communities for years after his initial encounter with Thompson. The recruiting station where Thompson had criticized Carlos' salute became a model for veteran-friendly outreach that honored military service while providing realistic education about military careers and their long-term implications. Carlos' work with military families helped them understand the progression of military careers from initial service through veteran status, providing guidance that enhanced both military retention and veteran transition success. His participation in community veteran events provided inspiration and support for other veterans dealing with medical challenges, demonstrating that military identity and contribution could continue despite physical limitations. The Marine Corps Sniper Hall of Fame member who had been mocked for his trembling salute proved to be one of the most valuable contributors to military recruiting and veteran support in his community. Years later, when Carlos' Parkinson's disease progressed to the point where he could no longer make public appearances, the recruiting station established programs that preserved his contributions and continued his work of educating young people about military service. Thompson's career was significantly enhanced by his association with Carlos, leading to assignments in veteran affairs and military family support that utilized the knowledge and perspective he'd gained from their collaboration. The lesson of Thompson's initial mistake became part of military training about the importance of treating all people with respect and the danger of making assumptions about capability or worth based on physical appearance or current limitations. Carlo's story reminded military communities that heroes didn't always look like the stereotypical image of elite warriors, and that the most valuable contributors were often those whose service continued long after their physical capabilities had changed. The man whose imperfect salute had triggered criticism proved that military bearing was about honor and respect rather than physical perfection, and that true warriors found ways to serve regardless of the challenges they faced. This story was brought to you by Silent Salute. Before we leave you today, here's our question. Have you ever made assumptions about someone's capabilities or background that proved to be completely wrong when you learned their true story? Someone whose physical limitations or humble appearance concealed extraordinary achievements that deserved respect rather than criticism. Tell us in the comments about the times when you discovered that your first impressions had failed to recognize the heroes standing right in front of you. And if you believe that true warriors never stop serving, regardless of the challenges they face, hit that subscribe button to support our channel. Every story reminds us that strength comes in many forms, and that the most important victories are often won by people who refuse to let physical limitations define their worth or limit their contributions to others. We'll see you in the next one.